Hello everybody, I'm Dr. Ben Quist and I have an exciting episode. I am here with Dave Schmitz, a physical therapist and a colleague of mine who opened the company Resistance Band Training Systems, resistancebandstraining.com. Does tons of continuing education in the arena of rubber band training in addition to also selling and manufacturing flat bands, right?
Yep, absolutely, yeah.
So we're gonna have a great time.
Good deal. Yeah, I'm excited. This is gonna be a lot of fun to go ahead and share with your audience a little bit more towards mobility and flexibility training on how you can use bands for that. I think it's gonna be a good time, and I think they're gonna learn a lot.
Awesome. Okay, well let's get to it.
All right.
Gary Gray was a big mentor of mine, and Gary Gray, for people that don't know, is basically the godfather of functional fitness. Functional physical therapy, I should say. And he had thoughts, but one of the thoughts he had was that the body is driven. It's not taught to move, it's driven to move. And it's driven to move by natural things in our environment like gravity, ground reaction forces, and momentum. And so when you look at resistance bands, and we'll talk more about this, but when you look at resistance bands being a variable resistance, I can go ahead and influence those three drivers to the point where if somebody needs to slow momentum down, I can do that. If they need to speed it up, I can do that. If we need to soften the ground contact forces because of maybe arthritic joints or injuries that they're getting used to ground contact. Obviously, if people are listening, they're going, well, that's physical therapy, that's rehab. Exactly. I use bands to help people regain their ability to walk. And then obviously the last one was this thing called gravity that's not going away. Sometimes gravity is too much on our body. How can we go ahead and reduce gravity's influences and in turn help our joints to function better? And that's where the longevity component and the more training with bands as we get older is really starting to blow up. And you see it all over the place now. People that they want to keep exercising, but by the time they get to 50, they start feeling beat up.
Yep.
And it's because all day long we're dealing with gravity. I mean, and when you look at occupations that people have to do, oh my goodness, a mailman, a construction worker, even our jobs, which some people wouldn't say are very physical, we're still on our feet all day and it slowly beats on us. So why bands? Because they can impact so many aspects of life and they're designed to train our body the way it was designed to work.
So, and I've heard you, I've watched a lot of your videos, so I know you mentioned 4 different points that are kind of critical points that you can, for individuals that are watching that are maybe in that kind of 35 to 70 age range, 4 critical components that you can kind of alter or change with the bands.
Yep.
And you've mentioned a couple of them already, but what are those again, just summarizing them?
Sure.
And then I would love to see some examples of them as
Perfect. Well, and what we're kind of referring to here is the mobility component. The mobility and flexibility, and how can bands influence that aspect? Because frankly, mobility and flexibility, specifically mobility, is going to be key to all of us. We know Father Time is going to go ahead and keep pulling our mobility. He's going to keep taking it away. So how do we train to maybe challenge Father Time a little bit? But also, I firmly believe that a lot of the things that come down to mobility are very trainable, and we can keep them going, but you have to work on them. So how do you work on them with bands? Well, when it comes to bands, and from a mobility perspective, there are 4 key ways to do it. Number 1, the traditional model of stretching, where you put a muscle on stretch and just let it lengthen. We kind of call it more traditional or static-based stretching. Well, the cool thing about using a band for that, because the normal is to use nylon strap. I use a band, well, it's elastic. So as the muscle starts to release during that static stretch, the band naturally takes up the tension and takes you further into the range of motion. So that's one way that we can use mobility. Second way, we've talked about drivers. Well, specifically momentum and specifically gravity. If our body can't handle those drivers, what happens is we shorten our stride. We shorten how far we step. We shorten how far we reach. Well, by shortening, we're shortening our mobility. And if we keep doing that over time, what happens is we lose that mobility.
Yep.
So
Yep.
what bands allow us to do is slow down momentum, reduce ground contact forces, reduce gravity. What's that going to do? It's going to allow us to lengthen further.
To move
a perfect
further.
example,
Yep.
and we'll show this in the samples, but a lunge, a simple lunge, taking a simple step lunge. Well, if I'm in a band and I'm using it as an assisted tool to reduce gravity, reduce momentum, I can step further.
Yep.
By stepping further, what am I doing? Mobilizing all the tissues that come with me being able to step further.
To move better. Yep.
The third way is going to go ahead and be how we use it to strength train. So hopefully your audience a little bit understands concentric, eccentric. Well, in a lot of movements, when we get to the eccentric phase, or we go through the eccentric phase, a lot of people call it the lengthening phase. It's where we're lengthening out the muscle, loading the muscle, so we can in turn contract or do the concentric phase. Well, there are a lot of exercises where the band, as we go into the eccentric phase, takes us a little further, stretches us a little further. And as we get more flexible doing that movement, we can literally stretch the band out further and take us even further into the movement. So from a strengthening standpoint, the band can go ahead and help us.
Almost an increased range of motion or overstretch.
Exactly, but with a free weight, the weight stays the same.
Yep.
So you can't adjust the weight unless you go get a new dumbbell or a new add further weight to the thing. You could do that. But in most cases, when you're using free weights, it's a single plane movement, and also it's going to go ahead and be limited because it only has a certain weight. A band is a variable resistance, as we mentioned, and so by simply stretching it or creating a greater tension at the beginning, it takes me further into the range of motion.
Sure.
Now the final way you can use this is using the band as a means of going ahead and creating distraction or joint separation. That's key, especially in the shoulder region. And so the band, again, it's an elastic tool. So if I grab a band and I just let myself hang on to the band and somebody takes the other end of the band and starts walking further and further away,
Sure.
it's going to start stretching me out, and all those joints that are associated with that stretch are going to be distracted. They're going to be pulled apart, if you will. There's going to be space gained within the joint. Well, a joint that has more space, like the shoulder, creates better range of motion. So now we know that Father Time wants to do this with our joints. In our low back, in our shoulder, in our knees, our joints start to get just this compressive forces, and there's less room there. Well, a band can allow us to distract that, pull it apart, and now, because of its lightweight, we can still move. So those are 4 ways that we will use bands for mobility and flexibility, and I'm looking forward to going ahead and sharing a few examples of each of those.
I've heard you call the bands, which I think this is really a good way to think about it. It's like an extra pair of hands, right?
Absolutely.
You know, where that it can apply resistance to your body in this variable way that can really assist with getting into some really unique stretching positions.
Another common thing I call it is a band is a muscle without a neurological or a electronic system to tell it what to do. No problem. I don't need it to do that. I need it to function like a muscle. So a band functions just like a muscle. Well, that's why they work well together, because they function the same way.
You and I have had conversations about this in the past, but you know, the techniques that you do, which you're going to demonstrate with the stretching aspect, you have this active stretch and you kind of pulse with it a little bit, which is not the same as, you know, obviously static stretching. You're going to a position and holding it for a period of time.
Great, yeah.
You know,
Thank
so I've always been curious as to why that seems to work so much better for producing range of motion.
Thank you very much. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
There's a thing in our body that becomes more prominent as we get older. It's called nerve tension. And nerve tension is when the nerve, which is embedded into the muscle tissue, okay? So nerves run all the way from our toe to the top of our head. They're literally, it's one consistent theme. You know, they're all connected. Versus a muscle has an insertion and an origin. And there's literally an endpoint to the muscle. So you've got this nerve that runs through these muscles. Well, what happens is that nerve tissue becomes tight. It becomes restricted. So now you go to stretch the muscle, but the nerve that's going through it is tighter. So you go to stretch this muscle and it just doesn't get better. As a matter of fact, it kind of hurts.
Yeah, yep.
And so that's the nerve tissue that's getting stretched. And the thing about nerve tissue is it hates static long-term stretching. It much more would prefer pulsing, like stretch on, stretch off.
So similar to your techniques.
Mobilizing.
Yep.
So you're literally mobilizing the nerve tissue. And you can do it with bands, as we'll demonstrate, but you can do it with bands because you're pushing against a resistance. So it's a little contract, relax, if you will. It's pushing against the band lengthens, backs off. And meanwhile, you're mobilizing that nerve tissue, which ultimately, once you free that up, now the muscle tissue can lengthen. And so all of a sudden, people that can't get those hamstrings to mobilize because their sciatic nerve and their nerve tissue is so restricted, they use the band to stretch with their hamstrings, which we'll demonstrate.
Yep.
And all of a sudden now, their hamstring starts to get more flexible.
Yep.
Well, you know what? They weren't tight because their hamstring was inflexible. They were tight because they had nerve tension system. Doesn't matter. You can attack both of them similar with a band.
Yep.
And that's the beauty of it. They don't really need to understand that. They just need to know how to do the exercise.
Interesting. So this is just a complete side note. It's a kind of personal interest question. So I now have incorporated band stretching, and typically there's some band strengthening in all the routines I do for myself and also for my clientele that I work with or patients.
Nice job. Appreciate that.
Oh yeah, put it in there. But out of curiosity, do you use any like soft tissue mobilization techniques, like rollers, balls, that kind of stuff?
Absolutely, absolutely. If there's one thing I can't do with a band is I can't go ahead and apply pressure to the muscle like you can with a foam roller, with all the guns now, with all those things. So absolutely, you need that to go ahead as a secondary thing. And frankly, there's just no way I can do that with a band. However, once that tissue is prepared for mobility and stretching, now you can bring the band in. So I do foam rolling. Matter of fact, it's one of those things in my life where I have to remind myself, hey, go back and foam roll.
Yep. Yeah.
And that's what the bands will do.
You know, it's interesting, even in my own personal routine, if I have a day where I don't have time to work out, the only thing that I will incorporate every day is mobility work. Yeah, I typically do exactly what you just said, 10 to 15 minutes every single day.
Absolutely.
You know,
I would strongly recommend everybody start doing that.
Let's get out there. Let's go through those 4 different types of techniques you were talking about with bands and show some examples.
Absolutely. Let's go. Let's take you through some examples of utilizing the static approach to mobility and stretching first. Let's take you through the static version first. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use this stable structure here to put my foot against. We're going to go through a hip rotational type stretch as well as a contract, relax hamstring stretch. I'll use this leg as my component. I'm going to take the band and I'm just going to loop it over top of my foot and attach it. I use the yellow band, so hopefully you can see that pretty well. So let's go ahead first of all, and let's just talk about using the band as a static structure. Now this band, like a nylon strap, can go ahead and just take us nice and easily into a stretch, and we can hold it there while we're stretching. So this is very traditional in regards to how we do it. Now we can advance that by taking the band behind our head, lock it out. Now I have my arm involved, and we can go into the same type of nice and easy, just statically holding and stretching. I'm not as big of a fan of that as I am of doing more of a contract relax. So I'm going to bring the band off for a second, use the same movement pattern, but now you're going to see that I'm going through a contract relax. And what this allows me to do is lengthen my hamstring by contracting my thigh. It's a great way to go ahead and mobilize that hamstring. And also, because we are doing it in a rhythmical fashion, you're going to get that nerve tension stretching that we talk about. If I want to expand the tension, I just lock out the band, and now the band is more resistance, so I have to push even more aggressively as I'm going into the range of motion, and I can easily go ahead and keep mobilizing. Another way to work a static stretch is just hip rotation by just pulling down on the band and just working at stretching that hip rotation. This is one of my favorite ways to get my hip rotation warmed up prior to getting into more advanced stuff. Once again, I can go right into doing more contract, relax. I could also go ahead, take the band, slide it, go behind, and work on adduction, static stretching, or adduction, contract, relax. As you're going to see, contract, relax, and static stretching are very easily combined as you go through this mobility sequence.
Number 2 is going to be using the band as a distraction tool, so we can get separation of the joint surfaces so they can then move around more effectively. You know, as we get older, our joints are going to go ahead and get tighter. And in order to go ahead and gain mobility in those joints, you need to create distraction. When I use a band as an elastic tool, it literally is going to separate my joint surfaces, so then we can move around that joint more effectively. Let me show you what I mean. We're going to use the shoulder as an example. Now understand, the shoulder joint is a ball and socket joint. So what I'm basically trying to do is I'm going ahead and I'm trying to take the ball and socket and pull it apart just a little bit, so then I can move the ball around in the socket more efficiently. How I'm going to do that? I'm going to take the band and just hook it onto my wrist. Now, I hook it on my wrist so I don't have to grip it. By gripping it, I got to tighten my shoulder. By just letting it set over top of my wrist, my grip is soft, which means now my shoulder muscles are relaxed, my arm is relaxed, and I'm literally letting the band distract my shoulder joint apart. Remember that ball and socket example or vision. Keep that in mind. Now, it's one thing to go ahead and drop down and just let the band statically distract you, but we want to move. So what's nice about this is now the arm is going to stay stationary, and all I have to do is move my body around to go ahead and distract or stretch the muscles of my shoulder while I'm moving my body on a stationary arm. Why is that important? Because that's going to be much more comfortable for your shoulder than if you did the traditional model of trying to reach and stretch. In this model, I'm moving my arm on a body that's stationary. On this example, my arm is stationary and I'm moving my body around doing different types of stretches, and all the time I'm doing it, I'm just simply letting the band distract my shoulder joint, create space, and then move that ball around in the socket as I comfortably move. There's so many ways to go ahead and modify this to fit your needs, but just keep in mind, hook the band around your wrist. Start with just a simple stretch where you just let the band pull your arm lengthwise. Challenge your base of support to put yourself in a position that is comfortable and balanced, and then just let your body start to move around to different angles and planes relative to the band attachment. Third way we're going to go ahead and utilize the band is we're going to assist movement. Now remember, what we're assisting is we're assisting your body to handle gravity, momentum, and in some cases, ground reaction forces. Let me show you what I mean. So one of the ways I really like to use the band as an assisted tool is for my lunging. And specifically when I'm doing lunging and reaching, or more importantly, warming my body up and getting ready for maybe a lower body strength workout or even a run workout. Let me show you what I mean. If I was to go ahead and lunge in this direction, the band is going to be pulling me that direction. So I'm going to have to learn how to deal with a band that's pulling me in that direction. So in this case, I've got to deal with a momentum. I got to deal with gravity getting a little bit stronger. I've got to deal with my foot hitting the ground and being able to deal with that increased ground contact force. As a result, what can very often happen is you shorten the step because you don't feel confident enough taking a full step. Let's reverse that now. Let's lunge this way. Now when I lunge out, the band is actually slowing me down. It's making gravity softer and making the ground contact surfaces very doable and very easy to control. So what am I going to do then? I will take a bigger step. I will lunge further. I will drop way down because the band is supporting me so that I can move further. I can drop down. I can go ahead and stretch and really
lengthen my hips out by using the band as an assisted tool that then in turn allows me to take a bigger range of motion or a bigger step in this case. Another way to go ahead and do that would be to go ahead and turn this way. Now, as I reverse lunge, I can reverse lunge back over in this direction. Now what's gonna happen is, because the band is assisting me, I'm willing to take a bigger step backwards. What that does is open up my hip, so now I get a bigger lengthening of my hip flexor and quadricep, which very often is tight. If I take my hands over top, I even length out more by stretching from the top, from the bottom up, that same hip flexor and quad. But none of this would be doable if the band wasn't supporting me. As an example, if I did it this way, now I've got to deal with the band resistance, momentum, gravity. I'm not going to take as big a step. But this way, I'm very happy taking a big step, and it keeps me balanced. So now I'm balanced, so I can stretch even further as I go ahead and do this nice overhead reach reverse lunge. The fourth and final way you can go ahead and utilize the bands to mobilize and improve your flexibility is as part of your strength training program. We're gonna go ahead and take you through what I call strength mobility and show you how to go ahead and do that. So we're gonna take you through a strength training program, but I'm gonna show you how your strength training is actually gonna help your mobility. Remember, a band is an elastic tool, which means it's a variable resistance, which means that as long as I keep tension on this band system, it's going to not only force me to pull against a resistance, but it's also going to take me back into that movement pattern as I go into what we call the eccentric phase. Let me share with you what I mean. If I step back here and I parallel my stance and I go into a full squat and reach, can you see how the band is lengthening me before I come out of it to do a contraction? So my simple rowing movement now becomes a strengthening of my low back, or excuse me, mid back, but it also becomes a lengthening of my lats as I go ahead and go into the eccentric phase. Now you may say, well, how can I advance that? Well, here's the beauty of it. Just step back. I've stepped back about a foot, and now the stretch is even greater as long as I'm willing to reach before I contract. So that's a perfect example of how you can go ahead and utilize the band as a strengthening tool, and by using the elastic resistance, it takes you further into the range of motion on your eccentric phase. Here's another example. We're gonna just turn it around. We're gonna do a one-arm chest press, pressing out. Now notice, as I come back, the band is taking me further back into the range of motion, so I get that nice chest stretch. If I want more stretch on the back end, all I have to do is step out and press, and then it takes me back. But here's another way to go ahead and think of it. Let's not just think of stretching as our upper body. Let's put ourselves into a split stance. I press out. Now the whole time I'm pressing, I am lengthening out my hip flexor and quadricep on this side. And what's really cool is the horizontal force that we're using is engaging my trunk, so it keeps my low back neutral, so my hip flexor has to lengthen out. So there's another way to go ahead and improve your mobility with your strength training using bands.
All right, well, that was great. You know,
Hopefully, yeah. Help
no.
out people, yeah.
Yes.
That'd be great.
Where can people find out more? Because I know you have a wealth of materials online that demonstrate and show a lot of this stuff. What's the best source to get more information on this?
Well, if you're looking for quick videos, you can go to my Instagram account, which is The Band Gym, or just search my name. You can go to my YouTube channel, which will give them both short version videos, but also much longer version videos. The cool thing is about my YouTube channel is everything is playlisted and categorized. So if you're looking for specifically mobility and flexibility, just go to the playlist.
Nice.
It's all right there. We've got about almost 1,000 videos.
Wow.
So relax, you know, and if by chance you go into my subscription and you see this Schmitty. It's called Schmitty. My nickname was a long time ago. I used that as my first YouTube channel, and there's another 130 videos on there.
Oh, wow.
But those are like old, and those are like, the quality is a little bit
The production
questionable.
value is not that high.
But what's really interesting is I was about 35, 38 when I shot those videos. And every now and then I go back and I see, oh, I'm still doing that. And I look pretty good here. So anyway, it's a little brief for me.
Yeah.
But go to YouTube or just go to resistancebandtraining.com. There's a huge blog post. We've got about 100 plus blogs.
Okay.
If you like to read, and most of them are all both text and video. I do a lot of video because it's pretty hard to tell somebody how to use bands verbally.
Or
you gotta show
in written format. Yeah.
So those are the three areas. And then, if you're interested, we do sell, we manufacture. I actually helped design our band. So you won't find the Quantum band anywhere else in the world. And we won't go into specifics of it, but it's designed with specific things in mind to keep it super durable. And it's proven that. We haven't changed our band since 2005.
Wow.
Because we haven't had to.
That's great.
Versus everybody else out there is changing their bands and coming up with different tools and blah, blah, blah. We didn't have to do that.
Nice.
So you can purchase bands from us if you want. When you go to resistancebandtraining.com, just go to the shop. And then lastly, if you are interested in learning more about bands and you really want to dive in to what I'm all about, I provide everybody a $1 30-day trial to the Band Gym.
Nice.
Which is my all-access membership site where people come in, and I won't go into details, but there's workouts, there's daily workouts, there's coaching, there's tutorials, there's workshops. It goes on and on. Everything that I've designed since I started this in 2000 is in there.
Wow.
But only the stuff that has been proven and works. We pull out a lot of the stuff that we did, and
all
it's just
the good stuff, huh?
all the good stuff. You betcha.
That's
all the
great.
good stuff. So that's where you can go, and I'm always available. You can email me, Dave@resistancebandtraining.com. Happy to go ahead and answer any of your questions, and you don't have to be a member. You don't have to be a customer. Just text me or email me. I'll be happy to help you out and get started.